Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Rob.
And welcome to another episode of Press X. And today we're talking about Resident Evil. But before we go any further, if you like this video and you like the other videos we're doing, then please do click that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and I'll give you access to so much more.
So much.
Yes. Anyway, cracking on. A retrospective of Resident Evil.
Yes, not going to get...
Retrospective Evil, as I like to call it.
No.
Oh,
Right.
come on.
No. Right, it's a retrospective of Resident Evil. So I guess we'll have to go through game by game.
Okay.
Not like every single game, because I would hate to put a number on how many Resident Evil games there is.
There are a lot.
And there's that new one coming out. I can't recall the name of it off the top of my head, but it seems like sort of a squad-based one with one person controlling sort of like a master guy, and you other four players trying to survive waves of zombies, waves of Mr. X with his dapper hat.
Basically Evolve, isn't it?
Yeah. But in the Resident Evil universe, with the Resident Evil 7/2 engine, which looks a great engine, but I recall, I think it was PlayStation 3, how there was a squad-based Resident Evil, squad shooter-based Resident Evil, in which you played what's the team called again? Oh, I forgot the name of the team now. It's a big part of the lore, and I forgot it. The team which Chris Redfield's a part of.
Was it Resident Evil 5 or 6? I can't remember.
No, you're completely on a different... It doesn't matter what it was. It was like a PlayStation 3 era one, an Xbox 360 era one, which is kind of in the barren days of when Resident Evil wasn't really hitting all of its notes. That was sort of around the era of number 5, and yeah, I think at number 5. It was around number 5 area. But anyway, that's off in the future.
Yeah. Anyway, starting off with the first game, which introduced the world to Resident Evil.
Stars. There we go. Remembered it eventually. But go on.
Yeah. Sorry, you just thrown me with you just coming in from left field going, stars!
Yeah, I couldn't remember the name of the squad that was part of Resident Evil, and it just came back out of the blue like these things do.
Anyway, the original Resident Evil game set in the creepy mansion with the mad scientist lab in the basement and the Dobermans and the
iconic Dobermans.
Yeah. And the what is it? Is it if it was a Pokemon, they'd call it Lickitung or something like that?
That was number 2.
Was that number 2?
Yeah, it was number 2.
Okay. Oh yeah, it was the Doberman, the Dobermans with the big draw for
yeah, that famous scene where they jump through the windows in that little corridor by the side on the ground floor.
Yeah.
And the first time you did it, everybody jumped at that. It was kind of like a passage.
Yeah.
That was.
See, this is the thing. The original Resident Evil game. Okay, the control mechanisms for the original Resident Evil game.
It was tank, wasn't it? It was tank controls.
It was tank controls. And then they did the remake, because we can't talk about the original without talking about the remake.
Yeah, I replayed it and then I didn't realise you could turn the tank controls off. So I was like, this is rubbish. What is this?
And then I told you that you could swap the control method.
Oh, oops.
And wasn't it so much better?
I never played it again. But yeah, the first one was possibly one of the most important games of all time, I'd go as far as saying, because it is instrumental in the mainstreamization. That's not a word. I'm making it a word. It was instrumental in the mainstreamization of the survival horror game. I mean, there's other things like Alone in the Dark, Silent Hill, which is probably as influential, but Resident Evil 1 is big, important game. Doesn't really hold up now. It is pretty classic in its horror setup, as in, here's a mansion, what's happening in this mansion? It's been done so many times before. But it was establishing a world, wasn't it? It established characters, it established mythology.
Yeah, and that was the great thing about the original Resident Evil game. Regardless of the actual mechanics of the game and the zombies and everything like that, it basically set the scene for something that could grow and evolve and become just this massive multimedia franchise.
Yeah, I mean, there's a version of this game where it's just some cops go to a mansion, there's some zombies, and that's it.
Yeah. And that's the crazy thing. There's so many different... See, one of the beauties about Resident Evil, and this is where it differed a lot from Silent Hill in the original PlayStation era, was that Silent Hill was a very singular game. It was a very individual game.
Well, there's no... the only thing tying together is the town Silent Hill. Beyond that, it's completely... Every game is as good as standalone.
Yeah, whereas Resident Evil set the scene for something that literally... because you see it in Resident Evil 2, which is one of the reasons why I'm bringing it up.
The Redfield people do return.
Yeah, the Redfields return, but this is the thing. You had...
Barry.
I'm not going to mention Barry. Okay. But anyway... in Resident Evil, you had this scene where they were talking about a virus, a viral outbreak, the T virus, and that set the scene for something that eventually became a worldwide zombie outbreak. And that then set the scene for not the mansion, but the entirety of Raccoon City, which was Resident Evil 2.
Yeah, I can't recall the connective tissue between the two. I know there's recurring characters, but I can't recall how it got from Raccoon City to that mansion, because that mansion's very off in the country, isn't it?
The mansion's close to Raccoon City, though, and what's supposed to have happened was that some things escaped the mansion, and because there was the Resident Evil 0 game, which was
prequel,
the prequel to Resident Evil, which I thought was a cracking game, to be honest.
GameCube, that wasn't it?
GameCube, yeah, and also the Wii, I think. But Resident Evil 0, it kind of built on the story of Resident Evil, or the remake of Resident Evil, and added to it, and added certain elements. It introduced the characters, and also explained what happened at the beginning of Resident Evil when the helicopter goes down and they have to take shelter. And then it moves on, and then you have Claire Redfield and Leon, because it introduces Leon.
Yeah, it does.
And
it's very ahead of its time, actually, for a campaign where you have two separate campaigns, two separate playthroughs for two separate players.
Yeah, in the original Resident Evil, you basically could play as Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, wasn't it? No, not Jill Valentine. Yeah, it was Jill Valentine.
Yeah, and then he became a Jill sandwich, Rob.
Okay. You've been waiting for that, haven't you?
It's the only reason why we're doing this video. He was like the most Z-grade acting as well, so I think even what I just said there was too well acted.
Yes.
So I'm sorry.
But the actual connectivity between the games in terms of the characters, I thought was really well done for its time.
Yeah, because I think the face of the series is probably Leon.
At the moment, yeah.
He's been in number 2... He was in number 4.
He was the protagonist of number 4.
And he was one of the protagonists number 6.
Yeah. Leon's basically the face of the series.
Claire's been in quite a few. I mean, she's had her own standalone franchise, hasn't she? She's had Code Veronica, which...
We'll get to Code Veronica in a bit, right. But here's the thing. Resident Evil 1 and 2, I think the most interesting thing about Resident Evil 2 was it was a B-movie through and through.
Yes, it was.
Every single thing that you could want from a B-movie was in the original Resident Evil game. I mean, there's that scene where you basically have the camera perspective on the corridor, and you're running down the corridor, and you have the hands coming through the windows.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty good moment. I won't deny that. But number 3...
Nemesis.
It was kind of like... It built on the success of number 2, because number 2 was one of the most successful games of the PlayStation 1 era.
Yeah.
So it was building up on that already, but I think, honestly, of the first 3, it is the weakest by a considerable margin.
And there's a reason for that.
Well, there's a Nemesis, which was, I guess, the sort of, here is a character who could just appear and he would kill you. But
nope. That's not the reason why.
No, that was like a big selling point of it.
That was the big selling point, but that's not the reason why. See, the reason why it's the weakest is because it's a rush job.
Oh, was it really? I never knew that.
Because Code Veronica was supposed to be Resident Evil 3.
Code Veronica was a standalone series on the Dreamcast.
Well, Code Veronica and Code Veronica X, I think because there was...
there was 2 of them, yeah.
There was 2 of them, if I remember rightly. But Code Veronica was, if I remember rightly, supposed to be Resident Evil 3, because the story was supposed to follow Claire Redfield.
I will vouch for it and say that from memory, we're talking about a game that happened a long, long time ago here, but from memory, Code Veronica is probably one of the better Resident Evil games. You could probably do a ranking of this, like top 10 Resident Evil games, there's been so many, but I would rank Code Veronica right up there.
Well, this is the thing. I think Code Veronica was... Code Veronica came out on the Dreamcast. I think it was called Resident Evil Outbreak in Japan.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. No, it was Biohazard Outbreak. Sorry.
Well, that's what it's called in Japan, isn't it? It's not Resident Evil in Japan. It's Biohazard in Japan.
The thing is, it does wear its heart on its sleeve when you call it Biohazard.
Wasn't Resident Evil 7 called Resident Evil 7 Biohazard?
Yes.
Got a poster right on my side. Yes, it is.
But anyway, Resident Evil Code Veronica. See, this is the thing. Resident Evil Nemesis came out on the PlayStation and the Dreamcast, if I remember rightly. And then they released a gun game.
I don't recall that one.
I have it.
That's pretty obscure.
Resident Evil Survivor.
Oh, I do remember that name, though.
Yeah. Resident Evil Survivor was unusual because it was first-person perspective gun game. And I can't remember if you could actually use a light gun with it.
It was the era of the light gun, so it stands to reason that the light gun would be a prime component of that.
And then you had Resident Evil Code Veronica, which originally came out on the Dreamcast, and then came out on the PlayStation 2. I think that's when they added the X onto it. So, but there was a second Code Veronica game, which was actually Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica.
You see, we're talking about retrospective of Resident Evil, and I think by this point it's already becoming quite convoluted.
Yeah. See, the Resident Evil games they're kind of like the X-Men of video games.
Oh, you beat me to that punch. I was going to say, it starts off pretty straightforward. Here's some people and zombies. How complicated can it be? Well, how long have you got?
See, this is the thing. It is kind of like the X-Men of video games because you have the video game timeline, as convoluted as it is.
Well, I think there's about 3 separate timelines. It's not one. It's all over the shop.
Yeah. But then you have the movies.
Which, the link to Resident Evil is pretty slim.
Well...
what's the name of the character which Mila Jovovich plays?
Mila Jovovich.
It's an original creation.
Alice.
Yeah, completely original creation. I think in a few of them, Jill Valentine's in there.
Jill Valentine's in there.
Albert Wesker is one of the antagonists.
See, here's the thing, right? I don't mind the Resident Evil movies.
Whoa, be careful.
Hang on. The early ones.
I think 1 and 2.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Stand by, but beyond that.
1 and 2, I can hold my hands up and say 1 and 2 weren't bad as movies, okay?
No, they weren't bad as video game movies. Let's not give them too much credit.
They weren't bad as video game movies. They were among the upper echelons of video game movies, right? Because video game movies don't really have a good rep.
I like the Tomb Raider one from last year.
Yeah, the Tomb Raider one from last year. But again, here's the thing. The original Resident Evil game tried to follow tried to follow the original game to a degree, but also tried to include certain aspects of some of the later games, which, it got twisted. But
the problem with
the main plot points...
The problem with both of the timelines is the further in you got, the less important zombies were. Yeah,
the main plot beats in the first movie were actually from the video games. So you had the mansion with the laboratory, you had the Dobermans.
Was there a liquor in the first movie? I think there wasn't there? Towards the end when they're trying to get away in the train station.
That was the thing that basically infected What's-His-Face and he eventually became the Nemesis. If you haven't seen the movies, that was a spoiler, but don't worry.
If you haven't seen the movies and you're worried about spoilers, really?
Yeah,
really?
I know. But anyway, because they even had the train thing at the end, which was the ending of the original Resident Evil.
And 2.
Yeah, but that's the thing. At least it tried to keep the plot beats from the video games. And then
for a point.
Yeah, up to a point. But then you had... how do I call it?
I can't remember one of them, but one of them was basically Mad Max. And they thought, we like Mad Max. Can we have a Mad Max zombie movie? Go on then. Doesn't matter.
That was Resident Evil Apocalypse?
Nobody's following this story by this point.
Yeah. Anyway, that was Mad Max with Mila Jovovich and superpowers.
Yeah, it's pretty far off Resident Evil. So coming back to the games, I think we're in the PlayStation 3 era now, just about.
Nope, we're still on PlayStation 2.
Because there's lots of spin-offs on PlayStation 2. Oh,
God, yes.
golly gosh, there was a lot of spin-offs on PlayStation 2. That one that I mentioned previously, the squad-based shooter, I think it used one of the sort of when you finished the game on Resident Evil 2, there was a character called Hunk, and I believe he had his own game. I think he was one of the members of this team shooter. But again, we're talking about something which is a long time ago, and there's been lots of Resident Evils.
But here's the thing: Resident Evil at this point, Capcom, they really started playing with Resident Evil at this point because it was so successful. So they could pretty much do what they wanted.
They were printing money.
Yeah. And do you know the great thing is that Capcom decided, let's experiment. Let's try different things. And
it could be construed as them not caring, so let's just throw anything Resident Evil out there.
Well, but that was the PlayStation 3 era.
Yeah, I guess
right?
so. Yeah.
During the PlayStation 2, Capcom actually cared a lot more, and that's why you got games like Resident Evil Survivor 2, Code Veronica, but also
Resident Evil made Capcom one of the biggest developers in the 1990s, without doubt.
Yeah, but the thing is, you also had games like Resident Evil Outbreak, right? And this is I regard Outbreak and Outbreak File 2 as some of the most important Resident Evil games for what they did. You had multiple characters, multiple perspectives, and these games were tough. These games were hard, right?
Okay.
They were challenging in a way that you don't really see now because it's all action-based. But these games actually had you trying to survive in a zombie apocalypse as survivors. Not as people who were armed to the teeth and stuff like that, but as everyday people.
Come here.
Well, to its defense, I think Claire Redfield was pretty everyday.
Well, no.
Initially. And then she kind of become like a hardened military badass.
No, Claire Redfield was a hardened military badass before that.
Okay.
But, not so much military.
She became more of a badass the further you got.
Yeah, but anyway, Outbreak and Outbreak File 2, you took on the role of civilians.
Oh, I remember this one now, yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And that was a big difference. It was a big departure from the rest of the games. Because you weren't armed to the teeth. You were basically having to... I mean, there was I think in Code Veronica, was it Nemesis, where there's that bit where there's Claire and the little girl, and the little girl has to navigate through zombies to try and achieve a thing and let Claire through the door. And that was one of the more tense moments in that particular game.
I remember a plane sequence for some reason. A long time since I played it.
But that's the thing. I think that's an aspect of just zombie video games in general that is overlooked. What about the civilians? What about the people who don't know how to fight, who don't know how to use weapons, or who basically are too old, too infirm, that sort of thing?
Yeah. Don't want to dwell too much on that though. So let's move to the one which really
changed the game for them, Resident Evil 4.
Yeah, which was remarkable because it got rid of the tank. I think the big selling point of that really is no more tank controls. That was the big change. You could over the shoulder shooting.
Over the shoulder shooting, no more tank controls, that sort of thing. And that wasn't the only big change though.
It was the major one.
No, there was a second major change.
And there weren't zombies anymore.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was. Ganados, was that it? Something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
It was a bug thing. When you headshot certain people, sometimes you'd have like this Dead Space style monstrosity sort of jut out of its neck.
Yeah, some kind of tentacle thing.
Yeah, it was a weird thing. That's clearly not a zombie anymore.
Yeah, and I was playing it, and I'm being attacked by villagers, and I'm shooting them in the head, thinking, okay, but they're villagers, so they're not zombies, but still, a headshot will get rid of them. And then, next thing you know, one of them gets back up and starts attacking me, and it's tougher than ever. I'm thinking, okay.
Yeah, it was an incredible game. It was full of quick-time events as well, I remember. But it had some iconic bosses, like the little Napoleon-style character.
Yeah.
Who I can never remember the name of, who basically became like one of the the biggest bosses, like scale-wise, that Resident Evil ever had.
Yeah. See, here's the thing, right? Up until Resident Evil 4, the timeline was pretty straightforward.
And it also had that horrible bit where you handheld that woman. Oh, that was bad.
Yeah.
The President's Daughter, was it?
Yes. But up until Resident Evil 4, the timeline was pretty straightforward. Okay, a couple
To an extent,
No,
yes.
no. It was straightforward. Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, Nemesis and Code Veronica. And then you had Outbreak and Outbreak File 2. You had whatever else. And then you had Resident Evil 4. This is the bit where it suddenly went, Capcom board of executives suddenly went, we're making a lot of money off this game, so let's just try everything. Let's get the how to make a video game manual, and we'll use every single thing in there. Because then you literally had, right, for the PlayStation 3 and the Wii and various others, you had Resident Evil, The Umbrella Chronicles, Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles, Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D on the Nintendo 3DS, Resident Evil Revelations, Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City, Resident Evil 6, Resident Evil Revelations 2. And all of these came in the space of,
3 years? 4 years, something like that. Wasn't a long time. They did hammer it hard in those years.
I mean, I've only recently played the Umbrella Chronicles, and it's not a great game.
Nah, not a lot of them. I mean, none of those PlayStation 3 era ones were
particularly good.
Yeah, number 5, it became a co-op shooter with Chris Redfield, who had been hitting the gym hard.
The steroids. I mean, I was playing Resident Evil 5, but all I could hear in my head was Cartman going, beefcake.
I can hear his thighs screaming. When he took his pants off, he's probably just screaming at a mirror. Like his thighs just red raw. Friction. Lots of friction for Chris Redfield. And Shiva, she deserved better, I think, as that character. Number 6, it tried to have 3 separate campaigns running concurrently. And that was like, one of them's
just a mess.
One of them's like a classic Resident Evil, yes, but also one of them has you basically playing a Superman character,
yes,
like a bald Wesker. So I think they learned the lesson there. I mean, it was around the time when I think there was claims of it sold 4 million copies, but it is still a failure.
Yeah,
and that never really allowed. I think they were burnt pretty hard via the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3 era, Capcom. So in the PlayStation 4, Xbox One era, I think they went away for a good while.
Well, I mean, this is the thing. After the so-called failure of Resident Evil 5 and 6, they started doing Revelations. And Revelations 1 and 2...
Much smaller scale,
and actually a lot better.
And went back to sort of the core idea of what makes Resident Evil.
Yeah. And
Barry was back.
Exactly. and so I found those games a lot more enjoyable.
But they were episodic, weren't they, if I remember correctly?
But the thing is, then you had Operation Raccoon City, and I have no idea what that game was about.
I don't think the people who made it do, to be honest. That was one of those final hurrahs. We'll get as much as we can out of this, see what happens. I mean, nothing ventured, nothing gained, and they lost a lot of things.
Yeah.
And credibility for Resident Evil, I'd say this is about 2012, 2011. Credibility for Resident Evil was...
It was reaching its low point.
It didn't have any. It didn't have any credibility at that point.
Revelations managed to recover some of the credibility, but
it was it wasn't very well received in the sense of it didn't get played by a lot of people.
Yeah, and that's because people had been burned by Resident Evil.
That's what I mean. The credibility of Resident Evil around that era was basically toilet water.
Yeah,
it wasn't there.
Did you ever play Umbrella Corps?
I don't know. I've played a lot of Resident Evil games.
That's what I'm saying. It was just called Umbrella Corps.
There's lots of
Umbrella Corps, however you pronounce it.
I remember it, but a lot of them sort of overlap each other because I was a completist for a while, and that was sort of beaten out of me.
I was so out of it with Resident Evil that I didn't want to play anything related to Resident Evil, and then I saw the trailer for Resident Evil Biohazard, Resident Evil 7,
which we didn't realise was Resident Evil. It just looked like, here's another rip-off of a Outlast-style first-person horror game.
Yeah.
And then it had that, whoa, it's Resident Evil?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And there was a lot of backlash against it, rightful backlash at the time, because it changed completely what a Resident Evil game was. Completely changed what a Resident Evil game was, but that's okay, because it's been so many iterations of the same thing.
Yeah.
It's fine that it can change what it is, and it can evolve. And that was the best thing that ever happened to Resident Evil. Resident Evil 7 was, outside of the success and the halcyon days of it becoming basically a household name,
Yeah.
it gave it its life back.
Yeah.
It gave it its vigour back.
And Resident Evil 7 is a fantastic game. I mean, it has all of the beats that you want from a horror game.
Yeah, it's different,
Yeah.
but it's, again, it can't be undervalued of something bringing life back to a franchise.
Yeah.
And the engine was absolutely fantastic, something which they basically made Resident Evil 2 a masterpiece for the second time around.
Yeah. See, here's the thing about Resident Evil, the Resident Evil 7 that I really liked was that if it kind of moved away from the old Resident Evil
It
idea.
was like Resident Evil 1 again, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, it
You
was.
were in a house. It was a very dirty house in the swamp.
Yeah.
But it was going back to what Resident Evil 1 was.
I like the fact that it kind of went back to what Resident Evil 1 was, but it also played a little bit with what Resident Evil 4 was in terms of the big monsters are the humans.
Yeah. Well, humanoids. I wouldn't call them humans, but
But you understand what I mean.
yeah.
They were human enough.
And the question now, though, I mean, Resident Evil 2, we've talked about that enough through this Press X series, but it is a masterpiece, I will go as far as saying.
The remake.
Yeah, and the question after that is what they're going to do that to next, and a lot of people are saying, oh, Resident Evil 3, and I say no.
I'm saying Code Veronica.
I was going to say
If
the
you're
same
gonna
as well.
remake-
Code Veronica has totally been forgotten about.
Code Veronica for me is still one of the best Resident Evil games ever made.
Yeah, I'd say. I mean, if they did that with the Code Veronica, I'd be so interested. I'd day one for me.
Yeah.
That'd be fantastic.
I think it's a good place to end.
Yes, it is. So if you had anything to add to this discussion of Resident Evil, do comment below. But in the meantime, don't be a Jill sandwich.